Hi guys, today we are back with another barn burner of a comparison. We are looking at the newly released A6700, a fantastic hybrid APS-C camera from Sony. We are going to pit it against another fairly new release from Sony, the Sony ZV-E1, ZV-E1 depending on where you are from. And this is a full frame camera that has been targeted at the vloggers, the travel people, but I bought one anyway, even though I don't do a lot of those two things. And there is a lot of crossover with these two cameras, so some people have been asking me, what is the difference between the two? Well, we're going to talk about it right now, so let's do that. So before I tell you the differences between the two cameras, let me just show you some footage, some side-by-side footage here, where first I will do the auto settings. Just if you take the camera out of the box, you press record, this is what you're going to get. I will do it in the intelligent auto mode for both cameras, and then I will switch to S-Log3 because I like to shoot in 10-bit 422 S-Log3 and then grade with the Leeming LUT, and you will see the two cameras side by side. Here we go. So obviously fantastic image coming out of both of these cameras, and the ZV-E1 is going to have a blurrier background in that particular test because I was using a 16mm f1.4 from Sigma on the A6700, which is optically comparable in my opinion to the 24mm G Master that I used on the ZV-E1. So they basically will have about the same field of view if you're standing in the same spot, but at f1.4 you're going to see a much blurrier background. You will have more background separation on that full frame ZV-E1. It is one of the advantages of full frame that you will likely be able to get a shallower depth of field when it comes to autofocus lenses. You can get something like a 50mm f1.2 for a full frame camera Sony, but you can't really get any kind of equivalent to that on the APS-C line when it comes to autofocus lenses. So of course I'm going to show you some rolling shutter footage and some low light footage as well when I talk about the differences between these two cameras. So let's just go ahead and do that. Let's start with the advantages that the ZV-E1 has over the A6700. So the first thing to mention, of course, is that fantastic full frame sensor. It is the same sensor that is used on the A7S III, the FX3, and the FX6. Obviously, this is a real deal, fantastic full frame sensor, and coming along with that will be not just the ability to control your depth of field easier, but also you will have better dynamic range coming out of the ZV-E1. So you have a scene where you have a nice bright sky and you have some dark shadows. You are going to capture more of that information with the ZV-E1. And that sensor also is amazing in low light. In fact, it is pretty much the best sensor you can get for low light. If your jam is out shooting in pitch black, you should get this camera. It is absolutely phenomenal in low light. It is much better than the A6700. The A6700 is a good camera in low light when it comes to an APS-C sensor, but the ZV-E1, that is pretty much the best full frame camera mirrorless that you can buy when it comes to low light capabilities. Just take a look. The The ZV-E1 also has fantastic rolling shutter, is pretty much the best in the business. The A6700 is no slouch. It has the FX30's sensor, and that is pretty good for rolling shutter. But basically, the ZV-E1 is about twice as good. It is just remarkable when it comes to rolling shutter. So if you're whipping your camera around a lot, the ZV-E1 is the clear winner. On the ZV-E1, the 4K 120 is only at a 1.1 times crop, so it only crops a little bit in from your 4K 30, your 4K 60, so it's just your shot composition can stay pretty much the same in all of the modes, and you get fantastic 4K 120 quality, whereas with the A6700 it is cropping in 1.5 times, and the 4K 120 is not quite up to the quality of the 4K 60 or the 4K lesser frame rates on the A6700, but the 4K 120 on the ZV-E1 is magnificent. The ZV-E1 has dynamic active stabilization. Now, this is something that is not in the A6700 at all, which kind of surprised me, but it crops in about 30%. It's on top of the regular active stabilization, and it creates a very stable image in the ZV-E1. So since it's targeted at vloggers and people who do a lot of travel, it makes a lot of sense to have such a great stabilization method. And let me just show you now some side-by-side footage of the A6700, which does have good stability compared to the ZV-E1. So now this is the dynamic active stabilization mode, and it is quite smooth, but I really do have to hold this lens out much further. So you are better off with a wider lens. I've been actually using the 11mm f1.8 APS-C lens with this camera a fair bit because it's so small and light, and then but with the dynamic active stabilization you can still see some of the vignette of having an APS-C lens on a full frame sensor, so I do have to do a little digital crop in post. So but this is how smooth this footage is. I think personally it looks great as I go into shadows right now, ruining my exposure. I was doing so great, so great. So this is the A6700 and the active stabilization. It doesn't have the dynamic stabilization, but I gotta tell you, this is so smooth when I have reviewed the footage that I doubt I would even use a dynamic stabilization if I had it, because it would crop in even further and then I wouldn't be able to use lenses like this. This is the 15mm 1.4 from Sony. Of course, you can also use the 11 for an even more comfortable vlogging experience and a wider field of view, but I like this option right here, and since the footage to me, I have no complaints with the smoothness. So yeah, I probably wouldn't use the dynamic. It'd be nice if it was in there, don't get me wrong, but I probably wouldn't use it because this looks to me about as good as it gets. I mean, look at this, smooth, pretty face. What do you want in your video, right? Can't get any better than this. Audio quality, top notch. I'm a professional. Let's kick it up a notch and do a light jog and see how the two stabilization methods compare. So this is just me lightly jogging, already tired. God almighty, why would you be doing this? Are you vlogging your marathon run? Come on, don't do that. I'm overexposed now. Now I'm jogging with the dynamic active stabilization on the ZV-E1. How is it? How is my marathon vlogging going? Oh my goodness, I'm gonna have a heart attack. I hope you people appreciate these tests. The ZV-E1 has AI framing stabilizer. Both cameras have the ability to do auto framing with AI, but the ZV-E1 has an extra one, which is the framing stabilizer, where you can keep a subject either in the center of the frame or a part of the frame of your choosing. The camera will crop in and it will try to keep that subject in the center or wherever you put it, and it does a pretty good job. The ZV-E1 has the zoom rocker, and since the clear image zoom on both the A6700 and the ZV-E1 is excellent, it is very usable. You basically get a 1.5 times reach on all of your lenses because they do some kind of smart magic upscaling. I'm not exactly sure what it is. Sony tells me something about shifting pixels around, and it's not technically upscaling, but whatever they're doing, to my eyes, it is very hard to perceive any kind of quality loss when you are doing the clear image zoom, and you keep the ability to track and use your eye autofocus in these two cameras, which is new for Sony. You can't do that on any of the other Sony cameras. So the clear image zoom, very useful, and this has a zoom rocker. The ZV-E1 has a zoom rocker, so you can get to that clear image zoom much easier. You could assign it to a button if you'd like to the A6700, but I find the zoom rocker very useful on the ZV-E1. There's a front tally light on the ZV-E1, so you know you're recording, or your talent knows you're recording without having to have the screen flipped out, and I always like a tally light. ZV-E1 has a better mic. Yeah, it's a mic where you can choose the front, the back, omnidirectional, auto, whatever you want, and the mic sounds quite good. It also comes with a little furry wind muff, a little Don King wig that you can stick right on top there. So you don't really need an external mic in some situations with the ZV-E1. So a very, very compact solution if you're going to use it that way. And the A6700 is just not going to be as good in that regard. And there is no way to put a wind muff on it because the mics on the A6700 are actually on the front of the camera. So unless you glued them with, say, super glue, then there's no real way to put wind muffs on that mic. So if you're going to use the camera's internal mic, which I wouldn't recommend anyway, but if you're going to, the ZV-E1 is definitely far more usable than the A6700. The ZV-E1 has cinematic vlog mode, so it's targeted at vloggers. So they give you this thing. It gives you these fake black bars on top, and then it gives you a few different picture profiles to go through. And I gotta say, they're pretty good. If you are a beginner and you're trying to get, you know, a cool looking vlog, you can just basically press a button and you're gonna have it. You don't have that on the A6700. Beginners might also like the background defocus that's on the ZV-E1. You press a button and the background either gets blurry or gets clear, depending on how many times you press the button. And if you don't know how to manipulate your aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, then that could be useful for you. But for most of us that know the cameras a little bit, probably won't be using that button very much. Now, a button you might use is product showcase mode. I like that for the ZV-E1. So you're trying to display the products, you just hold it up, boom, it latches to it. See, right now it's not doing it because my A7 IV is latched to my eye. So I have to cover up both eyes in order to get the focus to switch. But if you were doing product showcase mode, you could just hold up a product like this, boom, and it will go right to it. And now with the A6700, you can do that with the autofocus settings, but you have to dig into the menus to do it. And on the ZV-E1, it's just one touch of a button. The ZV-E1 is actually a lighter camera than the APS-C A6700. It kind of blew my mind when I actually weighed the two cameras, because the A6700 is a small, compact APS-C camera, and the ZV-E1 is a full frame camera, and it's lighter, 483 grams versus 493 grams. To have the sensor of the FX6 in a 483 gram travel-friendly camera, boy oh boy, that's a lot of fun. And now let's talk about the advantages the A6700 has over the ZV-E1, and it actually has quite a few. First thing we're going to mention is the sensor has 26 megapixels versus 12 megapixels on the ZV-E1. So if you're someone who likes to print out very large, or you like to do a lot of cropping in post, then the A6700 will be the way to go. The next one is a bit of an obvious one. It is the EVF, the electronic viewfinder. The A6700 has one, the ZV-E1 does not. So 2.36 million dot EVF, that is extremely helpful when it comes to composing your shot in bright sunshine. Sometimes looking at the screen is just not good enough, and the screens on the ZV-E1 and the A6700, 1.03 million dots, not the greatest screens in the world, so it is really nice to have that EVF, and a lot of photographers desperately need the EVF. They hate looking at the back of the screen, and if you are one of those people, the A6700 is going to be the way to go. Now, another thing photographers are probably going to pay attention to is mechanical shutter. The A6700 has mechanical shutter. The ZV-E1 only has electronic shutter. So the A6700 can take 11 frames per second in mechanical, and it can also take 11 frames per second in electronic shutter, whereas the ZV-E1 can only take 10 frames per second in electronic shutter. And because of rolling shutter, you may get banding in your photos, or you may get bends in your straight lines of fast moving objects. So a lot of people will only shoot in mechanical shutter to avoid these issues, and the A6700 can do it. The ZV-E1 cannot. There is an extra dial on the A6700. They have added a front dial, which is great. Now you have 3 dials to manipulate aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, or whatever you want to assign to those dials, whereas the ZV-E1 does not have that front dial, so you can only use the back dial and the scroll wheel. Much better to have the 3 dials. Better thermals on the A6700. For me, with overheating, the A6700, I got no overheating up to 4K 60. So right up to 4K 60, I would just press record at the highest bit rates, and it ran until the battery ran out. Now, I know people are getting varying degrees of overheating on the A6700, but I will tell you what I did. It is the camera on a tripod with the screen open, internal temperature set to high, and it was about 23 degrees here in my studio, and I just didn't have any overheating issues until I got to the 4K 120. When I got to the 4K 120, it overheated at an average of 19 minutes. Now, the ZV-E1 in my studio, it often overheats at about 30 minutes for my 4K 24, and for my 4K 60, it usually overheats somewhere around 20 or 25 minutes. And then with the 4K 120, I usually get about 13 minutes before the camera overheats. So A6700 for me was much more solid when it comes to overheating. And when it comes to streaming, both cameras can stream in 4K 30 straight from the USB-C, but the ZV-E1 overheats at about 30 minutes, and the A6700, it ran for 4 hours before I just got bored and stopped it when I was doing a stream from the USB-C. Just 4 straight hours, no overheat warning at all. Much better thermals on the A6700. The A6700 has a much better build. It is made of magnesium alloy, and it is a more premium feeling camera. The ZV-E1 is much more plasticky and doesn't feel quite as robust, and the grip is also much better on the A6700. It's a deeper grip, it is easier to carry and more comfortable in your hand, or wherever else you might like to put it. And that better build also comes with better weather sealing on the A6700. You're going out into the elements, shooting in the monsoon, you better get that A6700. APS-C lenses are often cheaper and lighter, which is another advantage for the A6700. You can use them, they're E-mount, you can put them on the ZV-E1, but in terms of photos, you're already at 12 megapixels with the ZV-E1, so you're going to lose a lot of megapixels, and that won't be great. And for video, you're going to have to use clear image zoom to zoom in, which, you know, will lose some resolution. You want to get that full IQ of that fantastic sensor, so you'll want to use the full frame lenses with the ZV-E1 for the most part. So, you know, A6700 is going to be a lot cheaper. Speaking of cheaper, it is about $1,400, whereas the ZV-E1 is $2,200, which is a substantial price difference. So now I can see how for some of you this is going to be a very tough decision. Overall, that ZV-E1 sensor is so fantastic, and you can get some of the capabilities of an FX6, FX3, A7S3, that amazing low light, and just that fantastic dynamic range and rolling shutter. But the A6700 is such a well-rounded camera. You're still getting 4K 120. You have all those great photo features. You have smaller, cheaper lenses. It's just a great camera overall. This one is tough. Let me know down below which one you would prefer and why, if any. And if not any of these two, just write down the one that you like, and we'll have a nice little discussion about it. And you know what? I appreciate you guys watching this. This makes you a fantastic human being. We're going to talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.